everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome to IDM Study Club. I am excited. It is a cold night here in Florida, but I know everyone is coming in from across the country. If you have snow, I'd love to hear about it. I just got back from Greater New York with Dr. Wilkerson, and I will say, after 24 hours, like, okay, I've had enough cold. I am ready to come back home. But I know a lot of you got hit, especially in my hometown, my OH. Where are you, Buckeyes? That was a great win. Where's my IOs out there? I also know you guys got hit by a lot of snow. So glad everybody's coming on tonight. I'm very excited. This is going to be a topic. I don't see anyone chiming in. Where is my chat? Let me know how cold you guys are, or if you're warm like me, finally warming back up. Like to hear where you're at. But as you come in, we're going to be talking about my favorite topic, which a lot of you already know is probiotics. I always, 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 when people ask me what are the biggest secret to sustaining health when I saliva test, I can't stress enough how important understanding bacteria are. And I always say, do we have bad bacteria, pathogens, or good bacteria, or probiotics? So we are in for a real treat. And I love that part of the title was like brain strain, because I think there is so much confusion and we need to get smart about probiotics. And with us tonight, I couldn't be more excited to be introducing Dr. Rachelle Beattie. And I'm going to call her Dr. Rachelle because when I got to meet her quite a few years ago, we kind of just hit it right off. I actually have to tell you, the first time that I even heard some of her, what I'm going to say, science, because a lot of you know what a dental nerd I am. I was like, oh, we're kindred spirits. This is my girlfriend. Instantly wanted to become friends with you, Dr. Rachel. I was like, okay, Rachelle, this is it. I want to know everything you know. When people say to me, Laura, I want to know everything you know about saliva testing, I just can't stress that's how I feel about you. That I just want to like, Dr. Rachelle, tell me everything you know about probiotics and your background. You're going to tell everyone your background as a microbiologist in microbiology. I think that's really important. Where you come from, just how you think about these things, how you apply them then to oral health is so important. But before we get started, during that symposium that you attended for us with IDM, I was just blown away by the amount of research. And that took us on a new path that I want to share with everyone, that you are actually formulating a study right now that is dear to my heart because it is proof of process for me. She is taking my process, my intellectual property of how I treat patients with certain products, and actually taking that data and putting it into a study. And everyone knows how important that is. This is going to be one of the first ones. We hope to do many more, but it's very hard to get those kinds of studies and that data. And this is exactly what she's doing. So hopefully at the end you could share, stay with us. Will you share with us, Dr. Beattie, at the end a little bit maybe about the study, just what's to come? You are published many times. If you got our uh, email blast, please go check out that link on our study, Out of Frontiers. Just some of the research you have done is absolutely amazing. And so I couldn't be more honored that you're doing a study with me and that you're heading that up. And I'm so grateful. But more importantly, tonight, I am just so excited to share Dr. Beattie with all of you and all of her science that she's going to bring. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and give us a little story about your background.
Laura, thank you so much. I have two disclaimers tonight. The first is that I am recovering, like so many, from that Thanksgiving cold we all seem to get. So please forgive my kind of scratchy voice. I'll be taking sips of water and I will try not to cough directly into the microphone. But Laura, it's always so hard to follow you up because yes, I remember meeting you and honestly, I told everybody, I remember actually telling my husband, I was like, I met this woman and she is so smart. She speaks so well, and I want to know everything she knows. So I really appreciate that introduction. I am going to do that thing where I stare in the camera while I try and figure out how to share my slides. Give me just a second, like we all do. All right, let me get these full screen. And then Laura, I want you to tell me if those showed up big. Hopefully they did. Are those good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Brain, just what we said.
Yes.
Hey, everybody, I got my coffee. Anybody else
Yeah.
grab your coffee? Get your brain activated if you need a little caffeine to get going. We're ready.
On the bright side, this isn't super heavy tonight, but I do hope that it's super informative. And again, I just want to thank Laura and the entire IDM team. And I'm going to shout out Kim as well because she kept me so organized for inviting me here to speak with you all tonight about something, I'm really passionate about, which is oral systemic health, even though I'd like to tell people I haven't been in this field for very long, but it's crazy to look back and realize it's been almost 6 years for me now. But you'll understand why that's kind of crazy for me whenever I give you a little bit about my background. But yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking about probiotic strains, focused on those for oral health, and how you can make smart decisions about choosing probiotic strains for your patients. And so I do, my second disclosure is that I am an employee of Probiotic Health. They are a company that manufactures oral care probiotics. But tonight, like anytime I talk about the science behind probiotics, this only reflects my scientific perspective. Their products and services don't influence any of this content. And so, with that, just a really quick little bit about me. Laura asked me to put this together, and I was like, perfect. I'm going to tell you guys what I tell my students. I am a research microbiologist. I got my PhD from Marquette University in 2020, which was quite an interesting year to graduate. And then I got my bachelor's and master's. I live in Columbia, Missouri. We have some snow. We were in that snow band. But I actually grew up in the far northwest corner of the state, where I got my bachelor's and master's, and where my interest in research really got started. And I just want to say the reason that I always still feel so new to this field is because microbiology has really taken me to a lot of weird, and you'll see what I mean, weird and wonderful places. I got started in research actually working in a place called Pitcher, Oklahoma. If y'all aren't familiar with that area, it's in the far northeast corner of the state, and it's one of the largest Superfund sites in the United States. They used to do a ton of lead and cadmium mining in this area. And I got started because I had a wonderful professor that was like, hey, they have these huge chat piles that you can see in that slide there. I'm pointing to the right. Sorry, that's where my slides are. These huge chat piles of mine tail waste. They look like mountains, but they're actually just mining waste that they pile up on the land that results in a ton of heavy metal contamination in the soils. And we were really interested in seeing what happens to the bacteria in those areas. How do they change and evolve over time? And it turns out that they end up gaining a ton of heavy metal resistance genes. That led me into my PhD, where I transitioned from looking at heavy metal contamination to manure contamination from the dairy farms outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, specifically looking at when you spread manure over ground that's frozen for about 6 months out of the year, what happens to all of that manure waste as it runs off into various water ecosystems and potentially, especially in rural areas, ends up in drinking water wells of the folks that live there. That transitioned me. That's actually one of the sprayers that you can see spreading manure directly onto a farm field there in Wisconsin. I took that picture. That actually led me into more of human health, right? Because we got really interested in whether or not some of the antibiotic resistance genes we were seeing in the environment, in the water, and in the wells were showing up in some of the antibiotic resistant infections we are seeing in patients coming into some of those rural clinics. That's kind of where my PhD ended. And towards the end of that time, I actually came across ProBiora's research where they were investigating the impact of probiotics on oral pathogens and oral health. And so that's kind of where my career has taken me today. That's where I'm still working, is looking at the ecology of the mouth and how we can potentially manipulate, shift, and change the oral microbiome from a state of dysbiosis, where we have a lot of disease, to a healthier state. Like I said, please forgive me, probably going to be a few coughs tonight. But so that's a little bit about me and how I got here. And now, like I said, I've been with Probiora for about 6 years. I'm really working in this kind of wonderful synergistic place with a lot of hygienists, a lot of dentists, and some medical professionals, taking a look at how we can help make people healthier by introducing positive shifts into their microbiome. But whenever I think about, and the reason that I titled this talk Strain Brain, and what do I mean by that is that it's kind of a chaotic world out there right now, the world of probiotics. There is so much data on bacterial species, bacterial strains, what will work for your patient, marketing messages, the techniques that have advanced. So we have so much more data today than ever before. And you would think that that would make it almost easier, right, to find a probiotic that's going to work for your patient specific problem. But the reality really isn't that simple. And so I always think of my brain as looking more like this on a daily basis, right? I have all of these various strains and species and studies that I've been looking at and looking up, and their interactions are complex and they're complicated, and there's normally not a one size fits all solution. And so today I want to kind of try and help to relieve maybe some of that. I like how Laura phrased it, the brain strain that comes from strain brain, and talk a little bit more about how you can actually sift through some of that data, and get to something that can have a positive health impact for your patient. But I want to back up a second. With all this data out there, one of the questions that I've had floating around for a while, and there was a beautiful Nature op-ed on this a couple of years ago, it was, we have so much more data than ever before because of new techniques in the field like sequencing. But are we really getting any more knowledgeable about the human microbiome? If we look back, the first bacterial genome was fully sequenced in 1995, and it took 13 months to complete. Today, to do that same kind of bacterial genome sequencing of just one genome, from the sequencing technique all the way through data analysis and annotation, that only takes a few days. The sequencing part itself, extracting the DNA and going through sequencing, can take less than a day, depending on the platform you're using. Really quick. Entire microbiome studies, where you're looking at multiple species in a sample, same thing, few days to a few weeks. And so all of this and the speed at which we can get data now means that realistically, we should know more than ever before about our microbiome. And yet, it turns out that there's still quite a few roadblocks to our knowledge base. And so I just want to highlight a couple of comments from some recent papers. One of those is here that you can see. High throughput sequencing delivered unprecedented views on complex microbial communities, but their popularization is accompanied by substantial technical hurdles that need to be overcome for efficient implementation and routine clinical procedures. So to pare that down, the takeaway from that is really sequencing can tell us who is there and what genes they possess, but not necessarily how they contribute to host health and disease. Another quote that I really like from Rob Knight's group in California: microbiome analysis, including these microbiome-wide association studies, are revolutionizing clinical investigations. And we are poised to make great advances in patient care with this information as we improve our ability to characterize and manipulate the microbiome and its metabolism. Our big takeaway there: we're still in the early stages of leveraging the full potential of these new technologies. We're not quite there yet, though. And then the last thing I'll leave you with on this is advancing microbiome science from a descriptive to a mechanistic science requires a detailed understanding of microbial function, but these functions are often not conserved at the species level. This is one of my big takeaways when it comes to probiotic science. Strain level differences can drastically alter function. And so if we're not smart about the research that we're reading and the probiotics that we're recommending, there's potential that we could actually cause serious harm. So keep in mind, unknowns aren't a bad thing, right? In science and in healthcare, we move forward all the time as we gather new data, and that's critical to moving the science forward. But if you're looking to jump into using products from a still relatively new and young field like probiotics, or if you already are using them, you should always have a little bit of caution, especially when marketing claims hit you so hard with things like one-size-fits-all solutions, claims that are too good to be true. If you have a probiotic that's claiming it can cure every single disease in the mouth, something's probably wrong there. And additionally, if you cannot go back to the scientific literature and find the mechanism of action for a specific strain, it's not something that you want to be using. So again, as a microbial scientist who works side by side with dentists and hygienists and other healthcare professionals and other scientists, I consistently get asked what I like to call the one big question. I get asked this time and again. and that is, which probiotic would you recommend? And although it really shouldn't, this question still continues to surprise me. And let me explain why. It really comes down to the core of what a probiotic is, right? A probiotic is a live microorganism that, when administered in adequate amounts, is going to confer a health benefit on the host. I'm sure for folks that are familiar, especially with IDM, you've probably seen this definition before. It's from the World Health Organization, right? It's a really well articulated, to be honest, definition. But I think for some people, when you hear something enough times, it's kind of like, if you're back in your Gen Bio course and you're talking about the mitochondria and your students like, yeah, it's the powerhouse of the cell, right? Like they've heard it a million times. That's all they're ever going to remember, even though there's so much more nuance to it. The same is kind of true here with this definition. And so when somebody asks me that question, which probiotic would you recommend? I always want to take them back to this definition of a probiotic. What we're looking to do with a probiotic is confer a health benefit. And so my question, back to whoever asks me that every time, my response is always, what oral health issue is your patient suffering from? You cannot confer a health benefit if you don't know what the problem is, right? And so if you want to know which probiotic you should carry in your office or use with your patients, the thing that you should focus on is the oral health issue that your patient is suffering from. This can include a variety of things, right? We see patients suffering from rampant caries, bleeding. I know that's a big one, especially now, at least in my population, my family and friends. Bleeding's become a really common concern. They hate going to the dentist because, it's the one time of year that they floss, is at the dentist, and they bleed all over the place. And they're like, what did my hygienist do to me? But normally that has some kind of a pathogen basis. We want to check out their pathogen load, or maybe they're suffering from halitosis. And so you really need to focus on your patient specific problem and choose research backed strains that provide a health benefit for that specific problem. Many times this comes down to, right, because bleeding doesn't just have to happen because they have something like early gingivitis or maybe periodontitis. Bleeding can also happen from the use of other therapies, right? Like think radiation therapy, or if they have some kind of systemic issue that's contributing to bleeding, or they're on a medication that contributes to bleeding. And so it's really important that if you're going to use a probiotic or a biological approach, you ensure that the problem is caused by something that probiotic can help solve, right? Which generally is microbial in origin. So what I mean by that is you need to do some testing. Okay. Salivary diagnostics is really important in the application of probiotics, because if you don't actually have a bacterial or a pathogen problem, your probiotic probably isn't the right solution to whatever that problem is. But today we're focusing on those problems, right? So we're focusing specifically on things that probiotics can target and treat. And so again, the first step that you want to take is testing. You want to know what's in that patient's mouth, what's causing their specific health problem, so we can focus on the application of strains that can either inhibit the growth of that specific pathogen, potentially completely kill that potential pathogen, or compete with space for it inside of the mouth. If you have an overwhelming number of something like Streptococcus mutans and evidenced by rampant caries, right? And then salivary diagnostics showing that number is high, the probiotic that you're going to use is likely different than if you have a really high amount of, say, your red complex bacteria like T. forsythia or T. unicola. And so while tonight I'm going to be a little bit broad, what I want to do is just give you a better understanding of what strains exist out there in the oral probiotic world, when they make sense to be used, and then which ones I would never recommend, and the reasons behind that, the literature-based reasons why I would not recommend those. Excuse me. And so we're actually going to start with, I plagiarized from myself here. So this table is from that article that Laura mentioned at the top. And if you haven't had a chance to, I think it's a great read because I wrote it, right? But it's a pretty detailed review paper that I put out in Frontiers of Microbiology in 2024. It went through a pretty thorough review process too, let me tell you. But I got asked so often about specific strains, specific products from all over the place, right? From consumers, from patients, from dentists, from hygienists. And I really wanted to summarize this information somewhere that it was very accessible. And so this table exists in that paper with some other species as well that we'll talk about. But what I wanted to emphasize and highlight here is if we're talking oral care probiotics, the cream of the crop, okay, the ones that have extensive supporting research are going to be your Streptococcus species and strains specifically, but they're going to be from the genus Streptococcus. And so you can see 5 of them here. Streptococcus oralis KJ3, that's the strain designator. You always need the strain designator if you're going to be suggesting a probiotic to a patient. Streptococcus uberis KJ2, Radish JH145, Salivarius Bliss K12, and Salivarius Bliss M18. These 5 strains have, I think, altogether more than 40 years of scientific research supporting them. And one of the things that I think is really important about each of these 5 strains, they were isolated and selected from healthy mouths, specifically for the purpose of targeting pathogens in the mouth. So they weren't originally isolated from like a yogurt culture or from the gut or from somewhere else in the body. These are oral bacteria that survive and thrive in the mouth already, that also have a mechanism of action, just listed here in the middle. Most of them produce some kind of a byproduct like hydrogen peroxide or a bacteriocin that inhibit the growth of those common oral pathogens, like our caries causing Streptococcus mutans, like our Fusobacterium nucleatum, right? Like our red complex pathogens. Time and again in the literature and clinical studies in double-blind placebo trials, products containing these 5 strains show very clear efficacy at reducing dysbiosis and returning the oral microbiome towards health. And again, with very, very clear mechanisms of action. And so my big takeaway from that is Streptococcus really is the most scientifically supported genus for tooth and gum health, if you are specifically looking and focusing on the teeth and gums. Okay, you want a Streptococcus strain. Some of the evidence that supports this, I'm just going to give you some really brief evidence here, right? So a lot of times the 2 Bliss strains, which are our Salivarius strains, are combined in a product together. And then Probiora does contain the other 3 strains in a blend called Probiora 3. And so I'm just going to give you some research data from each of those kind of subsets of groups. But in a placebo-controlled study in 2015, the Probiora 3 strains were shown to significantly reduce caries and caries-causing pathogens in children compared to a placebo. The 2 Bliss strains, Salivarius K12 and M18, are shown to inhibit immune activation caused by pathogens in the oral cavity. And so they can help reduce some of those other effects like inflammation and bleeding. And then some individual strain studies exist for each of these strains. Okay, I'm showing some combined, but individual studies exist as well. And Streptococcus salivarius M18 was shown to significantly reduce gingival bleeding. The one thing that I do want you to notice is that the difference, right? So the reduction here shown in orange actually starts to lessen over time, because after, can't remember off the top of my head, I'm sorry, 30 or 90 days, they actually stopped the daily application of the M18 strain, which did show and which suggests that for the probiotic benefit of any of these strains, even though they can survive and thrive in the oral cavity, replenishment is necessary. And so that's just something to keep in mind. And that's why testing, especially like long-term testing after you've potentially helped to fix a problem with a probiotic, is essential, because it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't need continued application of a probiotic over the long term. Here's a really nice case study too. This was again with Probiora 3. And so this patient was a 52-year-old female with moderate to severe chronic periodontitis. Prior treatments, prior to using the probiotic, included scaling and root planing, laser-assisted periodontal therapy, and laser bacterial reduction, all with limited success. And that limited success was characterized because this dentist was doing routine testing, right? So they were looking at levels of oral pathogens over time following each of these treatments. What the dentist ended up doing was including a probiotic, and in this case, Probior 3 in this patient's daily regimen for 12 months. And what they saw was a drastic reduction in our red complex bacteria after that 12-month application. And additionally, because I've learned that while I'm a microbiologist, so for me, this is enough, right? Just show me the difference in bacteria, show me the change. Hygienists and dental professionals really like to see the perio charts as well. And so there was a drastic reduction in bleeding on probing, a reduction in the depth of those pockets, and just an overall healthier status of the teeth in this patient's mouth, which is another, while this is a case study, right? A lot of our medical and scientific research starts with a simple case study, and then it's okay, why did this happen? And this was just a really nice proof of concept for the use of that probiotic. There is a whole other spectrum of oral care probiotics. And like I said, if you're here tonight and you're already familiar with probiotics, or maybe you're even using one in your office, whether that's medical or dental, you'll know that patients and maybe even yourself, right, it's an overwhelming marketing landscape. And so what I want to talk about next are some of the strains that that are present in a lot of oral care probiotics, but the science doesn't always line up with some of the marketing claims. And I will say, actually, I'll save it. I have a really nice consumer confusion story. I'll save for the end. But so Streptococcus, those are great for any kind of tooth and gum pathogen. As a broad category, the individual strains from that table, from that paper, you can pick ones that more specifically target like caries versus periodontitis, but that genus in general is excellent for the oral cavity. There's this other group of oral care probiotics that have some effects in the oral cavity, but they're more systemic rather than tooth and gum focused. The two big ones that I'm going to talk about are L. reuteri, which used to be Lactobacillus reuteri, but it's had a recent name change. So you might see this if you're purchasing probiotics that contain this particular strain. These are transient members of the oral cavity. Unlike Streptococcus, which survives and thrives naturally in the oral cavity, Lactobacillus is generally present at birth because of passage either through the vaginal canal, where many Lactobacillus species live, or from breast milk. However, as we age, lactobacillus are no longer generally a permanent part of the oral microbiome unless you have rampant cavities, because they can actually contribute to lowering the pH and increasing the erosion of your enamel. However, the two strains DSM 17938 and ATCC PTA 5289 do have some evidence for inhibition of oral pathogens. However, the evidence is very conflicting. And if you read any recent review, I'm talking from like the last 5 years, pretty much every paper boils down to some studies are positive, some studies are negative, some studies show absolutely no change. But the European Union did determine that L. reuteri does not have enough scientific evidence for the support of gum and tooth health. So, and they typically have much stricter rules for safety than we do, especially in things like probiotics. So that's just something to keep in mind. However, these two specific strains do have evidence for reduction of inflammation in the gut and as gut probiotics. So if you're looking for something more of a like widespread systemic effect and reducing or inhibiting inflammation, this could potentially still have some benefit in the oral cavity. On the opposite end of this, I have seen way too many probiotics in my research that contain Lactobacillus acidophilus, multiple strains. Sometimes they don't even have a strain designator, which is a no-go for a probiotic. They have only been included historically in probiotic products at all, not because they confer a health benefit, but because they have been approved for use in food products and dietary supplements because they were originally used as starter cultures in yogurt. You'll see that unfortunately, a lot of probiotic strains don't give any health benefit at all. They are truly just bacteria put in a product like a tablet and marketed as providing a health benefit because there's very little regulation for these products. simply because they have been approved and safe for use as things like starter cultures and yogurts and cheese. So I wanted to make that very clear distinction here. Lactobacillus acidophilus is definitely one of those strains. And additionally, if you find it in your oral care probiotic, unfortunately, it actually reduces pH in the oral cavity, which we don't want. Um, and it might actually contribute to caries in the mouth. That reduction in pH can be helpful in the gut. But again, if you are taking it in a lozenge that you let dissolve in your mouth and have those species attached to your teeth, you may actually be contributing to cavities rather than having any kind of beneficial systemic effect. So my big takeaway here, these strains or species should not be your first line choice for tooth and gum health. Other common species and strains that are found in oral care probiotics here, I just have them listed to the species level, include multiple other lactobacillus species like rhamnosus, pericaceae, plantarum. And a couple of, this one surprised me when I was doing my research for that 2024 review paper, some bifidobacterium species, which, if you guys are familiar at all with the human microbiome, are pretty much predominantly and only found in the gut and are only used for gut health. So for them to be found in products targeted only for oral care, I'm not talking about those combo products because they do exist, but only for oral care really doesn't make any sense. They are not providing any kind of a benefit for your tooth and gum health. And so these are just some other strains to be on the lookout for. There's no direct benefit in the oral cavity. And if you're being suggested or marketed a product that include them, the scientific research just is not there. So if you're wondering, again, why so many dental and oral care probiotics include strains without clear oral health benefits, I just really want to hit home that the marketing landscape for probiotics is kind of a black box. If you guys are familiar at all with how probiotics are regulated, typically they're dietary supplements or food ingredients, which means they don't fall under a ton of FDA oversight. You don't have to receive formal approval to market a probiotic. You just have to have evidence of safety, not efficacy. That is why so many companies use probiotic strains that have been shown to be safe in food products, again, back to that cheese and yogurt, rather than doing what I believe and the scientific research shows the folks who use those streptococcus strains and originally isolated have done, which is where they're looking for specific strains for a specific health benefit, right? If you go back to the original research on all 5 of those streptococcus species, the groups that isolated those were specifically looking for bacteria in the mouth that could inhibit other oral pathogens. That's how the isolation process started. That is completely the opposite of looking through a book of bacteria approved for use in human grade foods and putting that into a tablet and calling it a probiotic. And so this landscape is complicated, it's murky, and it's very confusing for consumers. And this is where I'm going to tell my story, which I'm sure my siblings would love, but I'm a middle child. So I feel like, I've earned to tell the stories for both my older sister and younger brother. But just recently, and I'm talking in the last 2 months, they both have come to me with a different product and asked me what I thought. The first was my brother, who came to me with a product that he had seen all over TikTok. And he wanted to know if I thought it would help him. That was the verbiage that he used. And so I followed up with kind of like I do, with dental professionals. And I was like, help you with what? And he couldn't articulate it, but he'd been hit so frequently with social media advertising for this specific bottle of pills that he was convinced it was going to solve every problem that he felt like he had. He's been struggling to sleep because he works a lot. He's a farmer. And he was like, it says it's going to solve all of my problems. That is what your patients are seeing. That's the kind of marketing that they're being targeted with, whether it's true or not. The same thing just happened to my older sister, who sent me a product, and she let me know that she had started taking this product that said it includes X, Y, and Z hormone health, right? It was marketed for hormone health. She thought it contained the actual hormones that she felt like needed to be replaced. And it turns out She was just taking a lot of extracts, including broccoli extract, right? But again, when consumers aren't familiar with the verbiage and the language that shows up on a lot of this packaging, it gets to be really confusing. And I think that's why it becomes so much more important as the experts to be really confident in what you're recommending and not just recommending just anything, not being like which probiotic should I use, but rather really focusing on the specific health problem that you're trying to help alleviate, your patient specific need and your patient population specific need, and making sure that whatever you are recommending is backed by scientific evidence and not just, well, they used it in yogurt and so it's safe for you to take. It's probably not going to do any harm, but is it actually doing any good? And so, like I said, I had to keep this short tonight because of my voice. So we're coming to the end here, but my first line of choice, your first line of choice, the world's first line of choice at the moment, until we learn more, for tooth and gum probiotics should be from the Streptococcus genus. Again, these are your strains isolated from the teeth and gums, specifically because those researchers were like, what bacteria are out there that can help improve tooth and gum health, that can inhibit the growth of common oral pathogens that cause halitosis, periodontitis, cavities. These are your 5 strains of choice that exist now. More in the future? Sure, as long as we take on studies focused on finding those strains that specifically inhibit pathogen of interest. If you want to use an oral care probiotic, or if you're already recommending one, my recommendation, again, is always to make sure you know what the problem is, what pathogens are present, and what health concern are you trying to mitigate or treat. Understand which probiotic strains actually help with the named problem. And then I think this is one of the really tough ones. Choose a brand with strong safety and consumer transparency. It should not be hard to find information about probiotic strains, the CFUs, safety studies, primary literature with a brand that has a solid product. Those things should not be hard to find. And if they are hard to find, if you ask the company for them, they should not be hard to provide. If they are, it's probably not a brand that you want to go with. And then if you are using a probiotic, and hopefully you've tested, right? So you know what pathogens are present. My recommendation is always to follow up. You need to evaluate the effectiveness. Did the pathogen levels actually decrease? Did the health concern improve? If not, an adjustment likely needs to be made because probiotics are just not one size fits all. I would never recommend a specific probiotic or a specific blend for every patient's healthcare problem. And sometimes there may be underlying issues that aren't directly related to the pathogens, which means that the probiotic isn't the best choice or maybe not the best first choice. And so testing is a really important component of that. And lastly, I do want you to remember more CFUs aren't always better. This one gets consumers all the time, right? They see 5 billion, 10 billion, 15 billion live and active cultures or active CFUs, and they're like, yes, that's the one I want from the shelf. But unfortunately, most of the time, all they're doing is just it's just a waste, money wise, because generally they cost more, but also efficacy and potentially even safety wise. All probiotics have a level, right? It's in that definition, a level adequate to confer the health benefit. So more isn't always better. And you really need to focus on what the literature says is the appropriate level rather than more CFUs every time. And so with that, I'm going to open it up for questions and discussion and let my voice rest a little bit. But I just want to thank you all for coming tonight. Um, and I appreciate you being here with my weak voice. This is a little shorter than I intended, just because I am trying to preserve my voice a little bit, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
There are so many takeaways. We do have questions, so I want to make this interactive. We have a lot of people who have been taking on probiotics. I always say, just going to go back, let's create health. I had some huge takeaways. I'm going to say I did not know about acidophilus, that it could increase our
Yeah.
caries. So just to our community, I'm like, wow, that is one of my takeaways. And honestly, what you just left us with, I think that I'm a patient consumer. We all are on some level. And I think, yeah, more is better. And that's actually kind of one of our questions that we're going to go to because I would like to know kind of your stance on combining them, because a lot of people have asked me, and I've seen many times, Dr. Beatty, where people want to combine them, and I've actually seen negative effects, but then I've also seen positive effects where maybe people have uh, push those out, like maybe timing issues and things like that. So, and I don't know what the direct answer is. Maybe we don't have one, maybe that's our next big study. But just what are your thoughts around that? If, we're taking like the Aralis, the Uberus, the Radius, and then we're adding in like these M18 and that. Just my personal experiences when we did them together, I felt like they were competing and I saw a negative effect. But I will tell you, I have then experientially in this community a few people on here who've like separated them or spaced them and actually had a benefit. What's your take on that?
That's that's such a good question, and that's one I get asked pretty frequently too. Um, if you're ever combining strains in a probiotic, right, and this is not necessarily something the dental community can do. This comes back to this is why you should partner, with your basic research scientists. You really need to do some studies to see whether or not they do inhibit one another, just like at the petri dish level. So they need to be co-cultured. You need to identify whether or not, right, because like the salivarius strains produce those bacteriocins, which is essentially an antimicrobial. Uberus and Aralis produce hydrogen peroxide, right, which is another antimicrobial. And so it's possible that they don't coexist, even though they're from the same genus. But normally, if you are, because I feel like you would get so many benefits, right, if you take them together. Um, I think a good alternative to that, if you are seeing like a negative impact, is what you just said, is taking them at two separate times a day. So it gives both time to attach, get into those pockets, hopefully without causing like an initial disruption. But yeah, more research for sure right there, because my dream, is a combined product.
I think mine too, but did post your study in there. I think a lot of people would like to read that, see that. That's a lot of times what I will show what the ingredients are, but to actually have that from your microbiology, from Frontiers, it's a great to actually have the literature, have that paper. But a couple questions here. We got, what is the difference between the Probiora product for cats sold for $20 and the product for the adults sold for 75?
Oh, okay, that's a really good question. So the cat one, first off, the difference is the number of days. So the cat product is just a 30-day product. The $75 version of ProBioR is a 90-day product. The other difference is the level of strains. In because the $75, like the professional strength, please note that if you buy regular strength Probiora, the difference between that and professional strength or the human product is the professional strength has 25% more cells. That does not mean that the regular strength doesn't work. We typically recommend professional if you have a patient who's underwent something like antibiotic therapy, like they would in the dental office, because they've essentially wiped out their entire microbiome. We're trying to replenish that as fully as possible. But both levels work. But that is the difference. So cat 30-day, professional strength 75-day. One is a 30-day product, one's a 90-day product. And then the professional strength has a higher amount of strength, even compared to the cat product.
Perfect. All right, next one. Would it be advised to use Probiora in addition to what we talked about, the L-reuteri, when targeting red complex? And then also, but also want the systemic component due to antibiotic use.
Oh, then I was going to say, if you're just for red complex itself, I wouldn't recommend the L-reuteri. But yes, if you're also for the antibiotic, especially wiping out the gut, absolutely. Put that back in there. It's also going to help with inflammation, right? And if you have red complex bacteria, the likelihood that you have inflammation is obviously quite high. So yeah, I don't see any issue there. And they shouldn't co-compete because again, lactobacillus, or the new name is like, I'm not going to try and pronounce it. L-reuteri is transient in the oral cavity, so there shouldn't be a ton of competition there. Whereas your streptococcus strains in general, most of them are going to not make it through the GI tract.
Can you explain transient for those that aren't microbiology? You're
Yes.
speaking my language, but I don't know if everyone knows
Yeah.
exactly like in layman's terms.
Transient species, if we're talking about in the mouth specifically, are those species that you can get into your mouth from various sources. particularly your food in general, but other activities, any way that you can get bacteria in your mouth. If they don't attach to your teeth, the gum line, and your like oral mucosa, and they pass through to the gut, those would be considered transient. If you want like a specific timeline, it's probably anything that doesn't stay in the mouth longer than about 24 to 72 hours on its own without being constantly replenished.
So those are those, or I call them orange complex species. We're talking about L. reuteri here. We're talking about the bliss strains, correct? I want to make sure that is the bliss the same or is that different?
Bliss strains are they're kind of in this weird like gray zone. And I will say there's active research, not from us, but that is an active area of research papers I've been reading. They survive longer than they're naturally found in the mouth. So salivarius, they were isolated from the oral cavity, which in general would lean towards they're not transient, right? They're a part of the microbiome. Um, but their permanent attachment is not as long as we've seen with some other streptococcus probiotic species like Oralis or Uberis. But I wouldn't consider them transient necessarily. They are a part of that core microbiome naturally.
Perfect. So I want to follow up to that because that's something I don't speak enough on, and I wish I did more. And I briefly kind of sometimes jump over it that there is substantivity to the ones in probiotics. So Oralis, right, and Uberus, and is it Radius? Because they all do attach. Can you explain that substantivity? I believe Dr. Cannon did a few studies on that, but just from your scientific standpoint, like what is that substantivity? A lot of people ask how long do they need to keep taking them? So I want to follow up with that. But first, I just want everyone to kind of know like a lot of those other ones are very transient compared to then the ones that we're recommending for the red complex.
Yeah, probiora, the attachment potential is quite a bit higher. They integrate into the biofilm a little bit more easily. And in general, that's just because if we're looking on a species level, Oralis is one of the most common bacterial species. So we're not talking about strain here, but most common species in the oral cavity of adults. And so they naturally have, right, like the genetics, the characteristics that they need to integrate more easily into that biofilm. Where you run into an issue is when you have dysbiosis from something like gingivitis or cavities, periodontitis, that disrupts that natural biofilm, which is why that replenishment is really critical. Um, I like this is why I think testing is so important because I am never going to be that person that's like you're going to have to take a probiotic forever because I don't think everybody needs to, but you do need routine testing to determine whether or not you are one of those people who if you don't take the probiotic, you lean towards a more diseased state, right? Because sometimes genetics, our lifestyle, various factors influence that. And you might be somebody that needs to take a probiotic forever to stay on the healthy side of the microbiome. Whereas other people have had like a one-time disruption that's caused absolute chaos in the mouth. But after they've went through a treatment protocol and used a probiotic for say 90 days, might be good, right? And back to full health. But testing really can help answer that question. Oh, excuse me.
Perfect. So Oralis is one of the biggest ones, would you say? I
Yeah.
just make
Yeah.
sure. Okay. Because that's where you're looking at some of those substantivity studies, and that's what we are
Yeah.
seeing. But I think he did those for quite a while. I think it was
Yeah.
over 90 days. Like that's why you should
Yes.
kind of stick
Yeah.
with 180 days to get that good seeding going that you
Yes.
past 90 days, you had your next
Right.
90, and it's like, okay, now maybe we can start to lower down. And I usually like to wean people off. I don't know how you feel about sometimes say like every other day or once a week. Cause like what you're talking about, we don't know sometimes all the factors, the individual variables can relate there. All right, let's see. We also had a question, how long, what you were talking about, how long do you take it for until resolution of the problem? What about maintenance? So that's a little bit what we're talking about here, that question, just to go on that. And then
Uh,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Your favorite question. We talked about this before people came on. We were talking about prebiotics. So that's usually
Yes.
number one question. We actually were talking if we could get in the conversation, Dr. Beattie, a little bit with prebiotic and postbiotics because we're having our own side conversation about postbiotics. But I want you to answer about the prebiotic for that question because I do think that's important. And then maybe you could tell a little bit about some postbiotics for us.
Okay. Do you want, okay, back up. What do you
Prebiotic
want me
first.
to answer first?
Prebiotic first. Yeah, is it good to
Um,
pair with a prebiotic or how important? I think some people always want to know.
okay. Um, if you have a relatively balanced diet,
Which means
I'm on team. You don't need a prebiotic with probiotics, but a lot of times if you have a patient coming in who needs a probiotic, they likely don't have a super balanced diet or something is affecting that oral microbiome.
yep.
Um, I am like deep in this research right now because actually next week with AOSH at noon, next Friday, I'm giving a talk about prebiotics and probiotics, but I'll say it's not my like direct line of research. And so right now I'm doing a big deep dive into the scientific literature. I was joking with Laura that, if in an ideal world, the ideal prebiotic would just be glucose, but then you'd be feeding all of your pathogens too. And you'd have a very happy microbiome in your mouth that would just take over everything and your gut too. Um, so more to come there. One of my goals is to publish a very succinct paper on that as well, because it's such an active area of research, both pre and postbiotics. Um, and I think we have a lot to learn in that area.
And so, I mean, I tell people I just think people are unhealthy. So I sit on the negative
Yeah,
side from Dr. Beatty
right.
just because of the work that I've done looking at so many GI tests and blood
Yes.
tests of inflammation. I
We
err.
can hope, right?
They need prebiotics to feed the bacteria. So prebiotic, right? We're gonna give food to these bacteria or probiotics. And then tell us about postbiotics. We use those a lot on the GI side.
Postbiotics, it's kind of interesting because postbiotics, right, they're the byproducts of the metabolism from your probiotics. So something that they produce that leads to that beneficial effect. That's how we've always termed them, at least. And so, like Oralis and Uberis produce hydrogen peroxide, that can be considered a postbiotic. The bacteriocins produced by salivarius can be considered a postbiotic, but sometimes it's something like a small peptide, or an antimicrobial product produced by those beneficial strains. And so in that case, at least from my understanding, you still need in general um, the probiotic species to be in the area, and they need to be producing something that again confers a health benefit. Laura, do you have a different understanding of that there? That is actually, I know less about those than I do prebiotics. So that's where all my
Just
reading
in
is focused.
GI world, I just look at it that a lot of people do need a postbiotic to move things back out of the system. So we want them to come out, and the postbiotics help us do that because a lot of people, their GI just isn't functioning. And so all of that's sitting in there and being reabsorbed, the exact thing that you want to get out of the system or not be reabsorbed. So there are a lot of people that need like a sodium butyrate,
Mm.
tributyrate to move, I say, move through the GI tract and end up in your toilet that we don't want the body to reabsorb. But they are helping break down just everything that you talked about. And a lot of people just need help in doing that. But just important to know. We had a question about from Marsha, when you stabilize chlorine dioxide with Probi or a professional strength, can this be used for maintenance? I'm just going to speak a little bit because this is just my soapbox. If you're treating red complex, you don't want to be using any harsh chemicals like that. PG, TFTD will grow in even stabilized chlorine dioxide. So to me, you're counter using that, but I'm going to let our microbiologist answer, not from a testing point of view like me about red complex. I'll let her answer just on the Pro by Aura Pro and
I'm going
stable.
to tell you, I'm not sure. That's not a question I've had before, and I know that's not something that we've like actively researched. So, Laura, you probably actually know more than me, at least in that area. I know that that's at least in our published literature. That's not something we've investigated.
Well, how do you feel about mouthwashes in general with Pro by Aura Pro? I think that's more of like a
Mm.
general statement. People are like brushing, flossing, rinsing, doing sometimes I call these harsh chemicals, and then they're trying to put in the probiotic.
We generally don't. Okay, so here's our like official recommendation from our instructions. If you're going to use a rinse, wait at least 30 minutes. And I'm sorry, I now have a cough drop in. So hopefully that's you're going to be able to hear it when I talk. Um, Wait at least 30 minutes, but in general, we don't recommend rinses, especially because so many of them out there are not pH balanced, which I know, you dental folks know that. And I've seen a lot of advocacy for that, especially in talks in the last couple of years. Um, but the big fear right, is that um, the components in a lot of those rinses are going to kill the good and the bad. So if you're trying to put the good in, you need some kind of a gap between that. But I do, again, this is my science brain. This is not my marketing brain. Is that we just don't have the research on it. So I can't give an exact answer, but we do recommend at least a 30-minute gap. It might need to be bigger. It might not be needed at all. But it's an area that we actively would like to research.
Yeah, and I just see a lot of comments about different products. Again, I'm going to tell you that's why you want to test. Remember the rules of red complex, and you can go find that paper in our literature because you're actually using probiotic or pro, especially for red complex. Those are their targets, as you saw in there. So just be mindful of that when you guys are naming off these products. But from Liz asked about delivery, though in products because we are seeing that, Dr. Beatty, tons of new products, which I call microbiome friendly, that have prebiotics and probiotics. And I'm a big fan of them because they sound fantastic, but I really
Yes.
don't know the delivery. I mean, I think that's the new era dentistry is going, which I'm very excited, getting away from all these harsh chemicals that we know the red complex can become really resistant to. Remember that chronic persistent exposure. And so Liz's question is, do you feel like the toothpaste or mouthwash products with probiotics in them are effective in their form of delivery, or is the lozenge better? Do you
That
know?
is such a great question. I just read a paper on this. It said right now the most effective delivery form is still lozenges or tablets. It's that you get better attachment than you do with drops or swishes or toothpaste. And typically the CFUs last significantly longer in the desiccated tablet form. So right now, it was a 2025 paper that I read like 30 minutes. I'll see if I can find the link so we can post it. But the tablet form is what's recommended.
Perfect. I know there's been a lot of talk of that, always talking about like we get pixie sticks and other delivery forms.
Yes.
But I do think it's fascinating that we're moving in that direction because we have the science, right? I would think that at some point, um, that we're going to be seeing that type and better delivery systems over and over. So you mentioned a few things about the strain level. The differences really matter. That was one of your big, my
Yeah.
brain
Yeah.
strain brain. And can you explain why the two products with the same species, right, name can behave so differently in the mouth? I think like how clinicians could have we're like being misled sometimes, I think, by the strains. And I know that's getting
Yeah.
researchy, but can you explain that because of the labeling?
Yeah. So if you think of a bacteria species, and I'm going to go with one that we all know, E. coli, right? If I have two cells of E. coli, they're not the same, right? Say they're two different strains. So E. coli 1 and E. coli 2, their genome may be 99% similar, which sounds like a lot because we're humans, right? And we think of how big our genome is and how specific our genome is for very specific functions. But in bacteria, that 1% difference can be the difference between like attaching in the mouth versus having absolutely no attachment or biofilm capability and just passing right through to the GI tract. So if you don't pick or use the strains that have been researched for their efficacy, for their specific potential, there's a likelihood that if you just picked another strain of the same species, that it is not going to have the same function at all. So if you only have like species level labeling, it tells you nothing about the mechanism or clinical relevance. The studies need to be at the strain level, and the probiotics that you choose need to be at the strain level, and they need to match that research, or else it's very unlikely um, that it's going to work the way that the marketing suggests. The marketing can make that very confusing.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing going on is that our labeling is kind of species on a lot of new things that are coming out. So I do think
Yes.
that's a great warning or just of interest. It's like read the label. What is the strain on there? You want
Yeah.
to know that strain. And kind of coming into that, that's then my next question, because then we see this claim of all these benefits, right? You just said like we have to know the strain, but if somebody's like listing species, And then they have like everything from bad breath to caries and gum disease. I put in quotes. Um,
Yeah.
how should we like be choosing then the right targeted one?
Um, First, if it's only to the species level, don't buy it, don't use it. So we'll just cut those off completely. They have to be at the strain level. If you have a product that has one strain in it, the likelihood that it can do everything is extremely low. So I'd be wary. Single species, not single strain probiotics are perfectly useful. If you had a probiotic with only Bliss M18, it gives you pretty good cavity protection, right? And that's just one strain. But if you have a product with multiple marketing claims saying that it targets, like you said, halitosis and gum disease, and cavities, I would expect to see at least two or three strains in there, and then evidence that those strains independently and or together actually perform those functions. I think when it comes to marketing, I'm consumer transparency is really important to me. Really important. Because like I grew up in a farming community, right? Think of my examples of my brother and sister who are like beautiful, wonderful, smart people. And I still couldn't believe whenever they sent me those things. Like my brother saw this on TikTok, right? Just because he is like at the gas station, they have ads that play now whenever you're pumping your gas. Like it's crazy. We're constantly being inundated with information. But off that soapbox, probiotics are not drugs. And that this is what I try to constantly remind people. If you get recommended a new product, somebody wants you to try out, and it says it treats or cures or prevents any disease in the oral cavity, you already know you have a problem. Only drugs can do those things, and probiotics are not drugs. So those are like the three big things I look out for. Strain name. Is it available? Is it on there? Is there evidence in the literature, which I know can be hard, but honestly, we can quickly Google that these days a lot of times from our phones. And then are the marketing terms outside of the scope of what a probiotic is, which is a dietary supplement, not a drug.
So I think I know your answer then to my next question, which is, can you give or consider a similar strain, right? Would that be okay if you're like, oh, well, this is kind of similar, like you're
Heck no.
I mean, because I think people do that all the time. It's like,
They
oh,
do.
well, it's the same name.
Right. No, it can actually be quite risky, right? One, you don't know if you or your patient is actually going to get the health benefit that they're looking for from a slightly different product, even in the same species, if it's a separate strain. Um, but honestly, if there's no research on it, it can even potentially be dangerous, right? We have plenty of bacteria in the same species where one strain has an antibiotic resistance gene and another strain of the same species doesn't, right? So it really can be very risky if that research for safety and efficacy isn't there.
Perfect. Liz had a question about for patients who are immunocompromised.
Mm.
I have a feeling on this from my side, but I'd love to hear from your microbial world. How do you guys feel? Is it bad to recommend?
Um, my recommendation always when we get asked that question or I get asked that question is have them check with their healthcare professional. Um,
I don't know.
because
Dr. Beattie,
I know. Um,
these
in general, as a microbiologist, if you have an immunocompromised patient who really would not be able to fight off any infection, I would say that the risk is too high. But I think that there's levels of risk, right? Because if you are providing a probiotic, they should not be an opportunistic pathogen, right? These should be safe commensal species that are minimal to no risk. I don't think anything's completely no risk, but very minimal risk in the body, which should include your immunocompromised patients. But I mean, if you have just like, I mean, a cancer patient with a completely obliterated white count, I don't think it's something I would recommend. Um, Somebody with a chronic illness like diabetes, I mean, I think that there's a balance there, right? But I'd say in general, they're probably pretty safe. But again, that's why it comes back to make sure you're providing one with research backed safety and efficacy, because those are the patients in particular that it could be very dangerous for if there's not evidence of safety.
Yeah, and just my 2 cents on that. Again, it goes back to what I think you're saying is what's the benefit for the patient if we're trying to
Yes.
get rid of or not get rid of, reduce those red complex that these strains, or else the ones that we're picking are going to directly target for this immunocompromised patient, then that could be a huge health benefit, not only to the oral cavity, to the GI cavity, because they're swallowing those red complex, and we get into all the lipopolysaccharides, what that's doing to these immunocompromised patients. But I also just want to bring up with immunocompromised is what is their autoimmune? Because if somebody is
Yeah.
celiacs or estrogens, this could be so beneficial to them. So again, it's not like a one size fits all. I think what you were saying definitely
Yeah.
really important. It's like, again, what's the health benefit for them? Because those specific like autoimmune issues could have huge benefits for them, because one, they may have never really been populated enough or been able to take hold, and two, if we're targeting an exact like issue for them and reducing that, that could have
Yeah.
really huge health benefits. And that's what we've been able to see. And so her question was really about these chemo treatments or HIV. So kind of you
Yeah.
answered that, like somebody completely wiped out. And I know a lot of those doctors want to work with you usually, right? They want to get them to a space where they feel like, okay, now you can start introducing things. That's typically
Right.
what we found with our cancer patients. Like, give us some time, get us to where we see good things
Yeah.
in the blood work. We want to make sure that now we can start to introduce that and look at it as like the GI tract. Like when you do sensitive, like, okay, now we'll try some eggs. It's like, okay, now
Yes.
we'll try one strain. And I think we do have to do that with these patients. So great question. Um, I just would love for you to share what we've been working on as
I
we've.
have this pulled up.
Okay, can you just share, because I'm very excited. I would like my colleagues to see, or maybe just give a roundabout, whatever you're allowed to share. I know there's some rules around that, but share with everyone what we've been doing.
Okay,
You
can you see my
doing.
screen? Is that up and visible?
Yes.
Okay. So this is you guys are kind of getting a first look at one of the figures from the paper, although I need to clean up a little bit on the x-axis because obviously AA is way too big. Um, so Laura, I feel like is underselling herself here because all of this data is really hers. What I've done is taken it and I've done the statistical analysis and the writing on it, and I'm finally nearly done. This has been like, feels like a year in progress, but um, we took, I think this includes 31 pre and post tests from 31 different patients who were on the protocol, Laura's protocol, right, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with, which included both super mouth rinse and then probiotics after scaling and root planing and antibiotic treatment. And so what we're looking at are the pre-treatment levels of oral pathogens and the post-treatment levels. And we got a significant, across those 31 patients, a significant reduction in, let me count these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what is that, 8 or 9 of the pathogens, including our red complex pathogens. And so this was ridiculously exciting. What you are looking at, so on the x-axis, those are our species, our pathogen species. The y-axis is our target copy numbers per mil in saliva. And I do just want to note, we have this level here, so don't get confused by the scale. Um,
Just explain that, because when
yeah,
she
yeah,
I'm like, oh my God, this is
yeah,
horrible. And she's like, wait, it's -5. Like, I'm like, where
yeah,
is zero? So everybody show them where zero is, or kind of explain
yes,
that. This is her brain, math
yeah,
brain, microbial
yes,
brain, not my visual hygienist brain, I'm gonna say.
yeah. And so I might edit that for the paper as well, so it's more clear. But statistically correct axes right now, but we have our level of one copy right here running. Oh my gosh, sorry, running right here across the middle of the page.
Yeah.
Anything below that is because uh, we had no detection for multiple patients. We do have to input a number for no detection because no detection doesn't actually mean zero,
Right.
right? So we input a very, very small number into the statistics. And so you end up with all of this pretty much underneath here is a no detect. And I know if you're like, well, AA pretty much started at no detect, that is pretty true. I mean, across these 31 patients, that's pretty much what we saw there. I think there was only one that actually skewed this bar here, but these are reductions almost to or right at no detection for the vast majority of our significant differences. which is really exciting. Yeah, so it's huge.
Yeah, so I'm really excited. I can't say how much I appreciate just what you've been working on to bring this to light, and hopefully this can become a much larger study. I think we did submit quite more than 30, but I just want people to know it is not easy. I think we like went through like over 100 and some tests, and I just want
Yeah,
to know just to get down to like
yeah.
everything matching up because I'm gonna say Dr. Beatty's a researcher at heart. This is what she does for a living. She's not in the clinical world. It's like this has to be right, this has to be right, this has to be right. And so hopefully we can emerge to having controlled studies to get more information. But a lot of people I know ask all the time, especially to me, like, where's your proof of concept? Where's the studies on that? And I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. This is just meaning the world to me to actually get something out there. But for all of you at IDM, you get to have your first glimpse at this, and then you'll have her whole write-up is I just provide the info and she takes over. I do not do the hard. You're definitely doing the hard part. Somebody is asking, what was there an arm in the study that was just SRP on how the throwback improved over SRP alone? We did not do that. There are tons of studies out there on just SRP alone, by the way, and we have tons of studies on the red complex. Are completely resistant. You have your 2002, 2008, and your 2021 study. All the SRP for the red complex are completely resistant to scaling and root planing. So if you're not familiar with that, those are things that we do teach, but you can go find those studies. They are out of the Journal of your American Academy of Periodontology, probably the two most famous are your 2008 and your 2021 out of the Journal of Microbiology. So just to kind of let you know, but I would love to do that because that is a great question. But can
Yeah.
you explain why that is what a lot of money, right? Dr. Bateman.
Yeah, it's
Are you going?
Yes.
no joke, that is for sure. It is definitely it's money and trying to nail down clinicians and sites to actually do a very controlled study like that. It's not impossible, right? People do them, but yeah, the time and the money. This is kind of unique, I will say, right? So for folks looking at like this figure and what we did with this study, um, it's almost a retrospective. Not exactly, right? Because we didn't do a pre-study and then follow them up years later. But this wasn't set up as a study, which is why we had to narrow the patients down significantly, right? From the, like Laura said, I sifted through like well over 100 to make sure that all of the parameters matched up as best as possible. But what I really think that this does, right? Because this is not controlled, right? We didn't control the patient's diets. The only thing that was controlled here is the protocol that was applied, right? So they all follow the same protocol. And so lots more to come, but I still think this is a really good example of a proof of concept. Really exciting. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rinaldi, I see you asking what were the products used in the graph. They were just what we narrowed that down to was the super mouth rinse and the oral probiotic ProBiora Pro. We did not have confirmation on toothpaste for throughout. That was one of the controls. Again, we had a lot of majority because the people who do follow my protocol will know that is in there. But again, I'm going to say that is out of my control. It's all Dr. Beatty. If it's not confirmed, it's out.
Yeah.
She is strict, which that's what I love about her.
Yes.
That's what we want. We want real research. So you guys are hearing that firsthand. But I know a lot of you are probably going to ask that similar question. But right, we just said, hey, if it's not confirmed, it's out.
Yep.
So we just confirmed those two pieces. And then I see what is the correct order? Floss, tongue scraper, rinse, water flusher, brush, probiora. Actually, it's very simple. I am going to say in the study, we just did, it could have been any toothpaste because we did have various toothpaste. I will say most of them were microbiome friendly, but they did start with a microbiome friendly paste. They had to be doing the rinse. They used either floss or any type, most of them were the soft picks, right? But we did confirm floss or soft picks. So anything that was disrupting interdentally, and they had to do the super mouth rinse and they had to do the one tablet at night, a Pro by Aura Pro. So that's what you're seeing there. Those patients did do, if you want to know order of in office, they had to go through scaling and route planning, the disruption that I teach and talk about, and they all did the amoxicillin with the metronidazole for 14 days. So that was all confirmed on there. And then the what you're seeing, then those products. Um, so great question to ask. And yes, that's the biggest proof of concept. I wish we could have used all over, I think maybe over getting close to 200, but 150, that would have been much bigger.
Yeah.
But science is science, and that's what we want to see. But I think it gives you guys a glimpse of the power of what's to come and what we're trying to do and move forward in our industry. So I do want to thank everyone for being on here. This will be recorded. A few people asked. We will always house that. You can always go to IDM Study Club. You drop to the bottom of the page, and all of the study clubs are down there. And Dr. Beattie, we're going to have you on again because when you write up my study, of course, I want to have you back because we are moving into the world of oral and GI, especially with the probiotics. I am doing some studies with a few physicians on that side, and we are moving more into this world of just what you're bringing up and how we can work together, this whole bidirectional relationship of the oral gut access. So there's going to be lots more to come over this next year. This is just a great starting point. And if you do have any questions directly, Dr. Beattie, where could they reach you or how could they find you? Are you on the Pro by Aura? I didn't know exactly what, or they could just come through us. What would you prefer?
Type in my email into the chat. And I love questions. People send them to me frequently after talks. Send me all your questions, even the weird ones. I love the weird ones. So I love when I have to go search for an answer. But yeah, I just dropped my email in there.
Well, happy belated Thanksgiving and happy holidays to everyone because this is our December. Yes, I won't see everyone. We skipped January. We will start back up in February in 2026, and we're going to have a great 2026. So stay warm, enjoy your loved ones and family. Everyone is so blessed, and we appreciate each and every one of you. If you would like to have something on our study club for 2026. We are formulating that. Please give us ideas, or if you have questions or comments, we highly, highly want to receive those from you. You are the community that we're here to help, and we just want to give back. That's why these are complimentary. Bring your friends, bring people who want to be educated. We want to grow our community, and we're going to be really moving towards collaboration and working together. But enjoy yourselves and stay safe and appreciate all of you. Good night, everyone.